The translation that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs isn't really what? No, he published. We have a word for that. We have a word. He published 1,005 songs because he was the sponsor. He paid for them. That's what the of means in Song of Solomon. It's about Solomon. We spent a long time on this. Now I want to see if you remember it. Is that coming through the mic? Through the... All right. Solomon started the wisdom movement. Remember that? Solomon started the wisdom movement. Who were the majority of wisdom teachers? Women. You remember that? The wise woman of Tekoa that Joab hired. The wisdom teachers. Who's the wisdom teacher in Proverbs? Whose voice is speaking most of the time? When you read through the collection of Proverbs, who's speaking? No. Yes, Mrs. Solomon. That's it. It's in the mouth of the mother. Remember? It's one of the marks of the wisdom literature. One of the things that's distinctive about it is, now we can't say because we weren't there, but even if a man wrote it, how would he present it? Even if a man was writing, how would he present it? As if it were written by a woman. Now, I don't know that it's known how it happened originally that wisdom teachers were women. I don't know if anybody knows that. But it is known to be a fact that in Israel, in Canaan, in Egypt, wisdom teachers were women. That we know for sure, but why, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. No. No, there was wisdom literature in Mari in the 18th century BC. The time of the patriarchs, they were already writing wisdom literature. There was wisdom literature in Egypt in the 22nd century BC. So it was old by the time of Solomon. Well, yes, and there was a reason for that. Solomon inherited King David's conquests, right? And David conquered all of west of the river, out to the ocean. Now there was a road along the ocean called the Via Maris. Well, we call it the Via Maris. They didn't have Latin names for their roads. And the road ran from the Nile Delta up along the coast through Palestine, up through Lebanon to Syria, where it connected to other major roads. Went up to the port cities. So there was trade. Yes. U.S. still does, yes. Then David conquered Transjordan. Can you say who was in Transjordan? Moabites. Now you're in the middle. Okay, Moab. Gilead is north, yes. Yeah. Ephraim, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh is Gilead, right? Countries now, it's countries. You've got Moab. Gilead, Bashan, the northern Transjordan, Israel itself settled. There was nobody living there before that. That's why they settled there. Who is south of Moab? What? Edomite, yes. Edom, Moab, who's next? Ammon. Oh, Ed. Edom, Moab, Ammon. What was the significance economically of David's conquest of Transjordan all the way up to Aramean Zobah, and he conquered Aramean Damascus, these little Syrian city-states and their dependencies? What was on the other side of the river? Was/is. What is on the other side of the river? No. We said that he conquered west of the river, and that was the Via Maris. Now, in Transjordan, east of the river, what was here that was significant? From Eilat all the way through Edom, Moab, Ammon, and the Syrian states. What was there that was of significance? A road. What was it called? The King's Highway. Good. Yeah. And it goes up to the Lebanon and anti-Lebanon mountains and connects ultimately to the North Euphrates River, the western branch of the river. Now, David conquered all this for strategic reasons. Solomon made use of it for economic reasons. What are some things that Solomon did administratively? Talk about Solomon the administrator. There's a background to this wisdom literature business. What are some things Solomon did? Why would the king of Tyre have been in relationship to Solomon anyway? The Via Maris was the road that ran from the Nile Delta all the way along the coast to the Phoenician port city. And as the goods traveled back and forth, whose territory were they traveling through? Solomon's. And what did he do? Yeah, well, he improved the roads, and it went on his shipments, and he charged. So he was automatically, at the northern end of his road was the port city of Tyre. The coast of Palestine is very smooth, with nice smooth beaches. Is that good or bad? Bad for ships. Why? No harbor. There's no deep enough port to bring the ship into the land. You run aground on the sandbars. They needed a port there so badly that Herod spent 30 years and made a port there artificially. And you can still see the stuff he dumped into the ocean to make a port out into the Mediterranean Sea. So there wasn't one in Solomon's time. The real place that he could send his goods to the sea to trade with Greece and Crete and Tunisia was Tyre. That's how he came into relationship to the king of Tyre. So, how did the Tyrians pay for the bill of lading that Solomon gave them? They paid for it with what they had, which was what? Cedar from Lebanon. Solomon happened to want the cedar. What else did he do? Well, how about on the other side of the river? The southern end of it was the port city of Eilat. What did he do there? He built a fleet. And where did he send the fleet? The fleet went in two different directions. In fact, there were fleets overlapping every other year. And where did they go? Where did they have these gorillas and apes and peacocks and so forth. Where did they go? Went to Africa, yes, of course. Went down the coast of Africa. And where else did they go? East. All the way to India. All the way to India and back. In a 3-year journey. Yes. Getting the spices that are mentioned in Song of Solomon. These spices that are mentioned in the book come from India. And when it's talking about the Spice Mountains and how the man is away on the Spice Mountains, really talking about the Tamil coast of northwestern India. And that, by the way, is why he's away. He's away. If you read Song of Solomon, he's away much of the time. He's on the Spice Mountains. Where is he? He's away on one of these trading journeys. He's away. Yes. Now, King Solomon himself did not actually lead these expeditions. The Song of Solomon is an idealized picture. Now, again, 70% of the Song of Solomon is in whose mouth? Who's speaking? Who's speaking? The woman. Yeah, yeah. It's a book written from the viewpoint of the woman, not the man. We don't know what his experiences are. We know when he comes back and speaks, but it's her emotional experiences that are described, not his. I think if you don't catch that basic point, see, if you just say Song of Solomon was written by Solomon, if you take that oversimplistic statement, then you miss the point of the book, the speaking voice in the book. What other administrative things did Solomon do? He controlled the highways. That's all we've said so far. He controlled the trade routes, and he extended the trade routes far off by continuing the trade routes onto the ocean. In other words, he extended the King's Highway right to Africa and India by building his ships. What else did he do? Something rather industrial. Hadn't been done before. A land out of whose hills you can dig iron and brass. Some of the passage from Deuteronomy. What did King Solomon do? He organized the mining industry. Some of those slag heaps you can still see from Solomon's mine. He mined copper and iron, and he was manufacturing in brass and iron. 2 generations, Dale. Remember when David was a young man, there was one iron spear in all of Israel? The Philistines had it. And 2 generations later, Solomon was the mining king. So he was mining copper and iron and selling copper and brass and iron around the known world. Who was he in contact with then in the south? We say that at Eilat, his port city, his navy headed off toward Africa and around the Arabian Peninsula to India. And of course there was a land route around the Arabian Peninsula. In the south, in what is now Yemen, there was a great Arabian kingdom where they manufactured the spices that they got in raw form from India. And that, of course, was the Sabaeans or Shebans, and we know what happened there. What happened? This woman was living at the other end of the trade route from Solomon. What did she come to Jerusalem for? What did she come to Jerusalem for? To see Solomon's great wisdom. And she also brought him things, right? Were these gifts? They were gifts, yes, but what was their purpose? Why did she bring the particular things that the historian tells us she brought? Huh? Yes, it was a trade mission. Those were her products. And Solomon was at the other end of the road. And what did she bring them there for? For business, yes, absolutely for business purposes. Here's what we in Sheba are producing. Why go all the way to India and bring back these things in raw form? Why not just what? Oh, you can see it. Why not just what? Buy them from us already processed. What impression do you get from Kings? Was she successful? Thereafter, the Sheban finished products are mentioned on a regular basis. So what would I say? She was successful in getting Solomon to simply buy direct from her. Now, she was especially fortunate that she came at a time when women were what? When women were being glorified as wise teachers. In fact, since that was part of the movement, was there a king of Sheba? Did she have a father, a husband? Maybe so, but what? No. And the point was that the queen was the one who was sent with the assumption that what? She would be the one who would be successful in this attempt. Maybe Solomon's weakness for women's reasoning was known. Just as a personal aside about Solomon, who was he again? We're talking about the role of women, wisdom teachers, how a queen would be sent to him to negotiate. When the weak 21st dynasty wanted Solomon's protection for their frontier, what did the Pharaoh do? Yes, he gave Solomon what Solomon really wanted, which was what? No. What did Solomon really want that the Pharaoh had? He had the city of Gezer. That's what Solomon wanted, and that's what he got as a dowry. And in order to induce Solomon to fortify the Egyptian frontier, the Pharaoh sent him his daughter and the fortress city that he wanted. You know, many of these marriages, what were they there for, these marriages of all these wives and concubines? Who were all these people? What were they doing there? Was Solomon wildly collecting women? No, what were they there for? Yeah, and a lot of times they weren't even nations. They were city-states, what we would call counties, right? A lot of these countries were no bigger than Worcester County is, right? And they would send them the daughter of the royal house. This was cementing alliances. This was empire building. This was how you did it. Obviously, we're not going to war with Zoba, because why? The daughter of the king of Zoba is King Solomon's wife. Well, so is everybody else. Well, yes, that's why we know there's not going to be any war. That was part of peacemaking, interestingly. Now, last week, one of the brethren, we were talking about this after church, made a comment. He said that he thought that King Solomon had gone above and beyond the call of duty in this matter, and that's probably true. That's what got Solomon in trouble, because he was stuck with all these pagan gods. These women wanted their gods, too. Besides the shipbuilding and the trade with India and Sheba and Africa, and the trade between Egypt on the south and Tyre on the north, and the trade with the inner Mesopotamian hinterland of Media. What else did Solomon do in the homeland? Did anybody say? What else do you know about his administration in the homeland? Well, yes. Of course, we always think of Solomon's temple. What else was there? Oh, yes, a very strong army. He had Megiddo and Gezer and Hazor and Mahanaim and all these cities. He built fortress cities with a strong army. And to do that, he reorganized the districts of Israel and Judah and cut across the old tribal lines. And how did the tribal confederacy and the elders of the tribes feel about that? They were very, very unhappy. And then, of course, there were the levies. If you were working in your field one day, a troop from the army might come by and tap you on the shoulder and say, what? Yeah, you're conscripted. Come with us. You're going to build King Solomon's next fortress. When am I coming back? What's the answer? When the king is finished with you, when he's done. Trouble with Solomon's building projects was what? They were never done. Yeah. And as he got more powerful, unfortunately, what does the record show? As he got more powerful, what? Yes, he got less popular. What else? He wanted to become what? More powerful. Yes. Here's a distinction between himself and his father. Let me ask you again. What was Solomon's relationship to his father? How well did they know each other? How close were they? Let's ask again, when did parents have children in the ancient world? How old was King Josiah? He was ranked absolutely the best king who ever sat on David's throne. How old was he when his eldest son was born? Anyone hazard a guess? And he was the norm, not the exception. How old was he? He was 14 when the child was born. So the child may have been conceived when he was 13. That was more or less the norm. The generation gap was minimized. That's why you were responsible for raising your children to the third and fourth generation. Well, considering the average age then, in the patriarchal system, how many generations are you going to be personally responsible for raising? Down to your great-grandchildren. And so if they turn evil and God visits the iniquity to the third and fourth generation, whose iniquity is he visiting on you? See, people get the wrong idea. That commandment doesn't say, you're bad, so God's going to punish your descendants for generations after you. What does it say? It says, you're bad, and what? You're making these generations bad, and what? You're going to suffer God's punishment, and so are they. That was the patriarchal system. Now, David had some 24 wives that are mentioned beyond others. We talked a couple of weeks ago about why polygamy was accepted and why the Lord accepted it. There were very good reasons, weren't there, for why polygamy was accepted, but it wasn't the ideal. Now, David had some older sons, didn't he? And when David came to Saul, how old was he? What? Yes, he was a young teenager, 16, 17, somewhere in there. He was provided with a number of things immediately, of course. He was provided with an assistant, a tent, and what else was he provided with? A wife. Had it not been that Jesse was ignoring the matter of dealing with his 8th son, David should have been what by this time already? He should have been married and been a father. And it's noted that he did not ever have any children by Michal, this daughter of Saul, who was his first wife. But he had children soon thereafter. And of course, Solomon was the child of his old age. So really, Solomon had half-brothers who were old enough to be what? His father or grandfather, yes. Certainly they expected to be king. Of all these children, Solomon was what? Of all these children, Solomon was what? He was the youngest. And there just wasn't a little gap. What was there? There were all these adult sons vying to be king, and what? And this little boy, right? Now, he was trained to be king, but by the time he was growing up, his father was already what? Old, and I might say remote. You know the picture of David being very remote by this time? Being an Oriental monarch by that time in that style, he was very remote. Really, how did Solomon get to be king? By divine election. It still wouldn't have happened except for whose fast action? Yes. Well, actually, Nathan and a few others wanted to make sure that Solomon became king because they were obviously the people who were training him, right? But who did they know they had to use? That even the prophet wouldn't go in and say to David, look, what did he do? He said, listen, you go in and tell the king, and I'll come in after you. Yes. So, the next thing we see is Solomon sitting on the throne. He's there on the throne, and who's there with him? He isn't married yet. Who's there with him? His mother. Do you get the picture here? Solomon's seated on the throne, and who's at his right hand? His mother. And you get the picture that what may she be doing? Yes. Giving him some good advice on what to do. She made one notable mistake that was the moment of Solomon's independence. What was that? She made one terrible mistake. She allowed herself to be manipulated by yes, the brother, the oldest surviving brother, the one who wanted to be king, Adonijah, asked for David's last wife, inferior wife. And it was a move by Adonijah to do what? To begin to consolidate his forces and to make himself king. And Bathsheba did not see through it, but Solomon saw through it immediately. And here, Adonijah knew that to get to Solomon, what would he have to do? Go through the mother. Listen, the girl says, come with me and I'll show you King Solomon wearing the crown. What? Song of Solomon. Wearing the crown what? His mother made for him. Now, if this is a historical reference, he had a crown made for him. And people must have thought to themselves how appropriate it was that Solomon's mother made a crown for him. Why? Because not only was that literally true, but what? That was a metaphor for the fact that she had made her son king. And it's interesting that we would see him in his youth coming to the throne, trained by other men, by Nathan and the high priest. I always think of the high priest who got deposed because I'm on his side, but who was the other high priest? The Aaronite priest. What was it? Zedek. Yes, thank you. Yes. That's a pretty basic omission there, yes. These were the people who trained Solomon. Zedek, Nathan, Okay? In fact, they were regents, in effect. Now, we can attribute Solomon's departure from the way of the Lord to something very specific. What happened before very much time passed? You read the chronicler, a new high priest comes. Nathan dies very quickly. What was the problem? Solomon's counselors who had guided him, what? They died, and what? By then he was independent enough to go it on his own, and he began to act like an Oriental monarch. Now the Song of Solomon is a reflection then of several things at once. It's a reflection of the wisdom movement itself, which began, you said, Ed, with Solomon. Why? Because he was in contact with these cultures that had the wisdom tradition. Okay? And he had inherited from his father already a court where there was literature and literary production going on. Right? Now, from what period in these 40 years does the Song of Solomon come? From what period in the 40 years does it come? Well, there are 60 queens. There are 60 queens in Song of Solomon. So what does that tell you? Now, a concubine was not a mistress. There were queens and concubines. A concubine was not a mistress. What was a concubine? A wife with different legal rights than the word that's translated wife into our Bible. There were two legal categories of wives. Yes, they weren't queens. Well, what do you suppose made the difference between whether a woman was named as a queen or not? Oh, yes, it was purely political. The woman who was married to Solomon for political reasons would have been a queen. A woman that he married because he wanted to from some village would have been what? A wife. Yeah. Some of these queens he never saw again. Don't get the wrong idea. He said, hi, how are you? And there's the palace I built for you. And if you need anything, let me know. And so forth. But the wives were wives. And in this choice of marrying more than one woman, Solomon was following his father and were less than ideal. There were 60 queens. So, what period are we coming from? Yeah, well, it would take a while to get 60 queens, you say. But when David died, and David was the great figure of his day, in different periods, there were periods when the emperor of Assyria was the big figure of his day. There were periods when the emperor of Egypt was the big figure of his day. In David's day, he was the big figure of his day. When he died, it was a big deal to all the countries. And what do you think they did right away? Well, see, you could not guarantee, if you were in Ammon, that because David had been the king of Ammon and treated you well, that what? That his son would. With the new king, everything changed and all the alliances had to be made over again. And what do you think all these countries did? Oh, if I were the regent in Ammon, I would find the prettiest gal in the royal house and hope that there was one. and get the ambassador ready and get the best stuff in the country and send her right over. Although that's the point I'm making. 60 queens were, to us, in our culture, with marriage meaning what it does to us, 60 queens would seem to be the work of a lifetime. But in Solomon's day, in the court of an Oriental monarch, 60 queens could be the work of your first year in office. Do you get it? All right. So I'm going to say now, Richard, there are 60 queens. When in Solomon's reign is represented by the Song of Solomon? It's early. Yes. Well, and Solomon himself is represented as young or old. Young. And who's still known to have made him king? His mother. Yeah. Yes. All right. Any questions so far? Yes. Yeah. Did they have spare daughters? Well, where would monarchs get daughters from? Yes, you get daughters from wives. And what did they have? Lots of wives. So what else did they have? Lots of daughters. That was part of the deal. But was either divine or the representative of the national god. And what was the king expected to be if the god was powerful? Fruitful, yes. Can you imagine a king who wasn't married, who didn't have 70 children? What would that say? Yeah. In fact, such a king wouldn't stay on the throne very long. Even if a country had the mistake of getting such a king, he wouldn't last very long. Why? Even powerful kings did not last long in the ancient world in revolutions. And revolutions there were aplenty. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Palestine, there were revolutions aplenty. Even powerful kings were unseated. Why? What would happen very quickly? A king without a lot of children would be a dead king very quickly. Why? It would be assumed that if the king was unfruitful, what must be the case? Absolutely, the way it works. But his God is not with him, and if you're a country who's gotten yourself into the bad enough situation that your God is not with your king, then what's going to happen? You're going to be destroyed right fast. Yes? So, what do we have to do then? And this is why kings were often unseated in favor of a brother or a son. It wasn't necessarily that they were just trying to destroy the royal family. Sometimes the people in the palace would just go in and kill a king and say to his brother, without the brother being involved, "Good morning, you're king now," because of his being unacceptable personally for some reason. Yes. No, but very interestingly, it was more equal than it has been often since then. A girl did have much. A woman was a value of a different sort, but of great value, just as a male child was, because it represented the fertility and the ongoing life. Yeah. So there wasn't, oh, it's a girl, let's try to get a son, like there is today. That was perfectly fine. And remember, especially we have a male-dominated view. We think of God as male, our Father. But remember, in these countries, what did they have? The Godhead was what? The Godhead was what? Male and female. There was There was just as much worship of the female, the Asherah, as there was of the male. Constantly, the kings of Judah kept putting an Asherah in the temple. They felt the need, culturally, of what? A female god. That's why there was that constant tendency to put the Asherah in there. Then the next king will come and hew it down, and his son will come and put it back, because there was constant pressure to do that. Yeah. All right. Now there was polygamy among the gods. There was polygamy among the gods, of course, because, as Mrs. White says, these gods were what? These were the gods that man created. These were the gods that man created in his own image. Yes. These are just more powerful human beings. And so, when you look at the gods of the surrounding world, they're just more powerful human beings. And they have all the faults and weaknesses of human beings. They're not moral. The concept of a moral God is unique to Israel. It's unique in the Bible. There's nothing like it else from the ancient world. All right? Now, the thing that is interesting about Song of Solomon, if you can say just interesting, in fact, it's striking, it's astounding, in fact, is that coming out of this period, what does Song of Solomon glorify? What's it all about? And this is unlike the love songs of the period. What's it all about? See, we sort of accept this as, oh yeah, Song of Solomon, sure. To us, it's not striking. It's striking from the period it came from. It's very striking. What is it about? Of what? Well, young love is a good answer. Why? Because we've been talking about marriages that were created how? Yes, there wasn't any, the concept of personal relationship between the man and the woman was totally lacking. That isn't even part of it. The deal is we got two countries here that have to be related, period. So what this is about is a relationship. And a relationship between what? One man and one woman. Can you imagine how unusual that was in the time that the Song of Solomon was created? Love songs weren't about a man and a woman. What were they about? What were they about? A man and what? And his wives. I'm sure that's why the rabbis chose it. It represents the ideal of creation. And in fact, that explains to me how an erotic song got into the canon. Why? Because this uniquely presents what? God's ideal. Here's an ideal of marriage which was unique in its day and harks back to the creation story. You know, in Mesopotamia, the creation story says that God made men and women. But the biblical creation story says what? A male and a female, he made in his image. Yeah. Adam and Eve, okay. Not Adam, Eve, Eva, and Evita, right? Just Adam and Eve. This is really something, and I hope I'm driving home the point that this ideal came out of the early period of Solomon's reign. It wouldn't have come later. Why? The political system that Solomon was part of And the polygamy of the day was allowed to overwhelm this ideal. And remember, they wanted polygamy because they wanted as many children as you could possibly have. And why did a country need every person you could possibly have? I would think more mouths to feed, bigger problem. China has a much bigger problem than we do. India has a big problem, a much bigger problem than we do. And that's reasoning from the modern mind, and that's what you can't do. In those days, they didn't have enough people. Can you think of it? You know something I heard on public broadcasting this week? In the next 40 years, at the current rate, the population of the world will double. We have to, if the world continued for 40 years from now, we would have to lay another whole world like the one we have on top of the one we have now. Which means at the current rate, without mass starvation, we'd have to multiply food production by 8 times and so forth. And it just is not going to happen. Population will double. What do we know? Studies show that there are more people alive now at this moment than what? Than all the people who have ever lived on Earth from the beginning are alive right now. Now, they had an opposite problem. They needed people. This is why fertility is a great issue in the Bible. It is a big issue. And how do you get it? And why they worship the pagan gods for fertility? They didn't have enough people. What did they need more people for? Yes, it was. They didn't just think that, it was. Why? The fact of the matter is, if the Assyrians are coming and we have 30,000 men and they have 80,000 men, then what? We have a problem. If the Assyrians are coming and we have 90,000 people waiting, then what? Then they have a problem. They won't come. Yes, in fact, we'll go visit them. Yeah.
Is your population being just fast monogamy? As long as every woman has a husband,
as long as every woman has a husband, put in monogamy, get your population to increase just as fast, he said. That's precisely what they didn't believe. Why did they keep losing the male population? Yeah. You can't read very far in the Bible, right? You can't turn very many pages before you're coming to what? Yeah, to a war. In which what? Just as casually as can be, they'll say what? 32,000 men were killed. But they saved the women. Yes. It was the way of the world. And again and again and again, what were they lacking? They were lacking enough males to go around, so what was polygamy? It was their compensation that made fertility possible when you don't have enough males, but you want to have all the women being fertile. Okay? I don't suppose that people would have believed that the Lord was with David, given their understanding and how their minds had developed, if David hadn't had a lot of wives and a lot of children. And interestingly, people did not fault David for having all those wives and children, and they didn't fault him for having all that trouble that he had in his house. Because I rather suspect that though we don't know about Sham's house over in Gath, but the kind of problems that David had, what? Sam probably had too. Yeah. And so it was pretty characteristic stuff. Because those polygamous problems are going to be there if you have polygamy. Right? There's no way to escape it. So now, the wisdom literature developed this ideal, especially from the woman's viewpoint, and this one man and one woman. And she's going to be fertile enough for him. And how is the fertility pictured in the song? What are the images of her fertility? Some of them. Can you name some? I presume you've all read Song of Solomon recently. Can you name some? How about the apple tree? the almond tree. Where is the woman? She's always in her what? She's in her garden. Or she's tending her vineyards. Yes. And because this is poetry, it's operating on multiple levels. These aren't just things in the natural world, it's what? It helps that almond trees were sacred and worshipped in other countries because of their fertility. Okay? So, she's fertile. That's part of the issue here. This song contains a polemic. You know what a polemic is? It's an argument for or against something. It was written as a polemic. Do you remember when King David brought the ark to Jerusalem? And he danced before the ark as it came into Jerusalem? What did he do? He gave everybody raisin cakes and sent them home. What were the raisin cakes for? What? Fertility. Even in ancient times, they gave each other hot buns in the spring with raisins in them for fertility. What was David saying? Everybody go home. The Lord is going to bless us now that the ark is here. And we're all going to what? We're all going to have children. We're all going to multiply. Everybody eat these raisin cakes and go home and have children. Now, in fact, in actual fact, what happened in David's reign? What actually happened? They did increase. Yes. In point of fact, the population greatly increased. And what did the people know? As they saw their families increasing and they saw the population increasing, what did they know? God is with us. God is with King David. We're on the right track. Now that you get this ingrained, can you see how difficult it would be for monogamy? However, in a time of peace, Richard, as King Solomon's reign, where Solomon did not accomplish his goals by wars. Solomon accomplished his goals how? By diplomacy and trade and inter-trade relationships and so forth. Solomon kept his empire running by economy. Solomon ran his empire by keeping everybody happy. That may have been contributing to the weakness of his character. He kept an age of peace by keeping everybody happy. All right? Now, as it came that there were, in fact, more men, and the age of peace that Solomon, his very name means, the peaceful one, as time passed and there were long periods of peace and men came to maturity, which means some boys reached how old? 13. Yes. What became possible? Monogamy becomes a very acceptable option. And so I'm saying to you that if Israel had always enjoyed the peace that the Lord promised, then what? Then monogamy would have been the norm, yes. And what the Song of Solomon is a polemic in behalf of monogamy and against polygamy. And nobody had done that before. And to represent monogamy as an ideal was a big step forward. Get it? All the time the question is, what is the Song of Solomon doing in the Bible? I hope you have the answer to that, yes? Okay, now, starting from where we started from, that is, there are other spiritual developments from the book, but so far we're just starting with the foundation of what was it doing in the first place. Then we go on from there to what are its other spiritual implications. All right? Thank you very much for your attention.